Hello again, this is Preheat. Welcome back to another World of Warcraft video. So yesterday, Blizzard dropped 12 new hero talent trees, and one of those is an Evoker tree, and we're going to talk about this. So here's the post. I'll link it in the description if you want to go read it yourself, but there's a lot of information here, a lot of really cool trees. But the one we're going to highlight today is Flameshaper. So many of you are probably seeing this name and not really recognizing it, and that is because this tree used to be called Ruby Adept, but it looks like they've renamed it, possibly after thinking through what this is actually doing and thinking of the lore of it, the fantasy behind it, and realizing that maybe that name is kind of lame. Some people have taken to calling this Flameshaper, but I actually think this tree has some potential. It's just, it's definitely not as complex as Scale Commander, but it definitely packs a big punch. So at the very top here, we have a new ability called Engulf. This is a 20-second cooldown, and we actually get 2 charges of it because of this talent right here. And it basically has this damage effect, and it's going to also increase in effectiveness depending on how many periodic effects we have on the target. So I know what you're thinking, periodic effects, right? What are those? So number 1, we have Fire Breath, obviously. That's going to be our main periodic effect. And then number 2, we also have Ruby Embers. So this is a talent we don't really take right now, but this is technically a periodic effect, and it probably will work with this talent. And then we also have some other new stuff as well. Now, we actually have a model for how Blizzard does abilities like this with Resto Druid. So typically, whenever ability looks at how many periodic effects you have on the target, it's going to look at a whitelist. Essentially, it's looking at only these abilities count, right? So stuff like trinkets and embellishments, stuff like that's most likely not going to work with this. It's just going to work with our stuff that should work. And then one of them is also going to be Enkindle. This is a new ability that basically gives us the damage over time whenever we use our Essence abilities. Very similar to the Season 2 bonus for Devastation, if you remember that. This was a bonus that gave us Ignite damage, basically, on our abilities. Kind of like a rolling window where it calculates the damage and it adds on the additional amount. So here we're going to get 20% increased damage on our spenders, and that's going to be dealt over 8 seconds. And of course, this will count as a periodic effect, so it will also make our Engulf better. Now, I want to skip to the bottom here because this is really important to get an idea of what this tree actually means, right? So Consume Flame makes it so whenever we press Engulf, our 20-second cooldown with 2 charges, we're going to take our Fire Breath and we're going to detonate it. So that's what you saw in the intro to this video where I did basically 3 tip the scales Fire Breaths in a row. If you do the math, so Fire Breath itself does about 24 seconds on the rank 1 of damage over time. This is 8 seconds of that, and it's being multiplied by 3. So essentially, this is going to be like tip the scales Fire Breath every single time you press your Engulf button. Just what Devastation needs. More burst AoE with no way to deal with threat. So yeah, I have mixed feelings about this. Obviously, I'm really excited for the prospect of having even more burst AoE. However, because of our threat situation, because we have all of these issues with pulling threat, and because our entire class is designed around doing a bunch of damage up front, I could see this being extremely problematic for tanks because there's no way they're going to be able to hold aggro on this if we're hitting Dragon Rage, tip the scales Fire Breath, tip the scales Fire Breath, tip the scales Fire Breath, right? No way. We're dead and we're clicking release. But anyways, let's assume that we have a tank with an AoE taunt and they've used that ability. So if you use your Engulf on the pull, first you're going to have your Living Flame dot up, right? Because you just use a Living Flame. That's going to give you the Ruby Embers talent like we talked about. And then we're also going to have, if we do like 1 Disintegrate or 1 Pyre, we're going to have the Enkindle dot on this. And then we also have our Dragon Rage into Tip the Scales Fire Breath. That applies a 3rd dot. So that's going to be 150% effectiveness on this. And then boom, we're going to hit the Consume Flame. We're obviously going to want to have Engulfs for Dragon Rage. So since this is only a 20-second cooldown, and since we have 2 charges of it, we will be able to bank 2 charges for every single Dragon Rage. And that will be the way to go, right? This is going to be a whole lot of burst damage, and we'll definitely want to have it during our Dragon Rage. Since it's 20 seconds only, we're definitely going to be able to use a lot more of these than we normally would be able to, right? Because if you use 2 on the pull, then you're going to have those 2 back in 40 seconds. 40 seconds is not long enough for our next Dragon Rage, so we will be using Engulf outside of Dragon Rage, but obviously we'll be pulling whenever Dragon Rage is coming up soon. So this is going to consume 8 seconds of our Fire Breath, which is not great because we want to have Fire Breath up on the target pretty much at all times. However, we have this node right here, Traveling Flame. This makes our Engulf also increase the duration of our Fire Breath. It's going to refresh it back to what it was, assuming that we don't have additional targets for it to spread to. So if you read the tooltip here, it says Engulf causes Fire Breath to spread to a nearby target. If no valid targets are present, the duration is refreshed. So in most cases, we're going to Fire Breath every target anyways, so I don't really see this being too much of an issue. However, if you are moving a Fire Breath to additional target, you do have 2 engulfs, right? So you could always hit the other target with your next engulf and then explode that one and then cause it to go back to the other targets or refresh duration. So since we have 2 charges here, unless there's like adds actively spawning as we're using our engulfs, I don't really think there's going to be much of an issue with running out of Fire Breath. On the right side here, we have Enkindle. We already talked about this one, but it's just 20% more damage. But we also have a choice node below it, which causes our engulf to reignite Enkindle, extending the duration and increasing the effectiveness by 25%. So 25% of 20 is going to be 5%. So that's going to be 25% of our damage. And then the wording here is a little weird because it says extends its duration, not refresh. So I think it's safe to assume since this is an 8-second duration, it's probably just going to add 2 additional seconds to it. So that'll just be a little extra damage. And then also we have expanded lungs. This is going to make our Fire Breath damage over time increase by 20%. That may not seem all that interesting, but remember, we are blowing up our Fire Breaths, right? So the more damage we have here, the more damage we're going to have in our Consume Flame. Essentially what you're doing with expanded lungs here is you're just increasing the damage on Consume Flame by 20%. And it's already a huge amount of damage, right? Tip scales, same idea, right? Huge amount of damage. We're taking more of the dot. We're doing more of it up front by causing it to be a higher tier on our empowerment level. So in either case, this is just going to be a ton more damage on Fire Breath. So it may be a little boring because it's just 20% more damage on it, but it is very, very, very effective. Below Traveling Flame, we have Burning Adrenaline. This is going to cause each of our engulfs to increase the cast of our next spell by 30%, and it does stack twice. So if we use 2 engulfs in a row, that's going to be a 60% increase cast on our next Disintegrate. Definitely going to make our Disintegrates much faster, which is nice. And I really like that this stacks too, so you don't have to worry about using it right away. On the left-hand side here, we're going to skip over this choice node for now. On the left-hand side, we have Conduit of Flame. So this is just a 10% increased critical strike chance on targets that are above 50% health. You can think of this as just like a 5% crit buff if you want to. But this kind of leans into our niche of Giant Killer where we do more damage up front and cause more threat up front. Below this, we have Titanic Precision. So it says Living Flame Reversion and Azure Strike critical strikes have a 100% increased chance to trigger Essence Burst. So this is a little bit weird because Reversion can't crit. Living Flame and Azure Strike both roll for their Essence Burst on cast. So it's not really clear what this is supposed to do. I'm not really sure if this tooltip is wrong or if Blizzard maybe isn't aware of how this is coded. But one thing I think is good feedback for them maybe on this talent is that if this talent is going to work the way that they say it does, they need to make it actually roll for the Essence Burst on hit. But more than likely, I think the better way to fix this is just reword the tooltip so it says that you have a chance equal to your critical strike chance to gain an additional Essence Burst. I think that makes more sense. But if they make it work off of damage that you deal, then, you know, Azure Strike does have an advantage here because you're hitting 3 targets. I don't think they need to rework these spells to make this talent work. I think it makes a lot more sense to just fix this talent to make the wording right on it. So we already talked about Red Hot Engulf, but this basically gives us an additional charge of Engulf, and it also deals 20% increased damage. We don't actually know how much damage Engulf is going to do, but it's most likely going to hit pretty hard. And obviously, because you're causing the Consume Flames, I mean, it's going to be a really worthwhile button to press. On the bottom right, we have a choice node here with Life Cinders and Draconic Instincts. So Life Cinders just gives your Renewing Blaze to a random person who's injured. Injured in WoW just means someone who doesn't have full health. So in most cases, this is probably going to get completely wasted. Although I could see this being useful in PvP, like maybe in 2s, because you know exactly who it's going to go on, right? It's going to be your partner. But I could see this being kind of wasted in scenarios like, imagine a Warlock who has Burning Rush on. Their health goes to 99%. They get your Renewing Blaze. That does nothing for them, right? They're already full health. They're not in risk of dying. It's probably not going to do much in that case. The other option here, Draconic Instincts, is pretty good. It makes it so that whenever we take damage, we have a chance to instantly heal 30% of the damage that we just took. That chance is going to be increased depending on how much damage we take. This is not going to be a cheat death. It's not going to mitigate damage in any way. It's just going to give us back a little bit of healing. One thing I think is actually kind of interesting about this is it's most likely going to work with Scarlet Adaptation because all of our other talents that heal damage, those also work with Scarlet Adaptation. So that's just like more damage that we're getting because Living Flame scales with Scarlet Adaptation there. So that's good. But I don't know if it's really as useful as the Scale Commander talent for defensiveness, right? Like we aren't getting more Obsidian Scales effectiveness. We aren't getting more mitigation. This isn't going to help us not get one shot. It's just going to make it so that we get a little passive healing whenever we take damage. And we don't know the proc rate, right? So until we see the proc rate, we can't really make a good assessment on this talent. But I think more than likely, we're going to play Draconic Instincts in most cases. On the top left, we have a choice node between Trailblazer and Shape of Flame. So this talent is kind of a meme, but Hover and Deep Breath are going to travel faster, and also Hover is going to send you further whenever you use it with directional input, 50% on both of those. I could see this being a bit annoying if you don't want to travel as far as you would with a Hover, right? Like if I only want to make a small move with Hover and I press this with directional input, I'm just going to go flying. I could see myself flying off a platform or flying the fire or something like that, not being good. There's definitely a lot of cases where this talent could get you in trouble. However, there are also a lot of cases where this talent's going to be amazing. So I definitely think this is going to be a node that you choose, either option depending on the situation. If you want to go further, you're going to choose Trailblazer. And if you don't want to go further, you probably just go with Shape of Flame. This is going to make it so your Tail Swipe and your Wing Buffet make the enemy basically miss their next attack in the next 4 seconds. I could see this being situationally useful in like PvP maybe, or like in a raid if a raid boss hits really hard with like a slow hitting melee swing. Although we aren't really sure if this debuff is going to apply if the target can't be knocked. So it may not work on raid bosses. It may work. We will have to wait and see. But I definitely could see a scenario where I just choose Shape of Flame because I don't like traveling further with Hover. However, I think if you master the art of hovering, Trailblazer will be better. That being said, though, there is an issue with Hover, right? So if you're in the air or you get knocked up and you press Hover even with neutral input, your character will go flying forward. This is really annoying, and it's definitely got me killed on Council because the bear does the knock up and then does a cleave in front of it. Not great whenever that happens. But yeah, so Trailblazer, if it is flinging you forward and getting you killed, you may just want to go with Shape of Flame instead. I really wish Hover would just send you down if you're in the air with neutral input, and I feel like this is something that Blizzard should probably look into, because I don't think it really makes sense for Hover to send you forward if you don't give any sort of directional input, just because you're in the air. So yeah, this tree is not very complicated. Like compared to Scale Commander, it's a lot easier to understand. You're basically just getting like a whole lot more damage with this 20-second cooldown 2-charge nuke you can use. However, Evoker has the threat issues, and those threat issues are probably going to get you killed in a lot of cases. So unless they address Evoker threat, it's really hard for me to get excited about this tree because I just know that consuming my Fire Breath with Engulf is going to be an AoE taunt. Right, kind of like Scale Commander. We have an AoE taunt ability that they're giving us. Really awesome. I love that I get this burst AoE. However, I'm also concerned because I know what's going to happen if I press the buttons effectively, which is kind of sad. And I don't think waiting for 5 Sunders is going to help in this case because this is a ton of damage. Like, just to give you an idea, Tip to Scale's Fire Breath is hitting for like 1.6 million right now. Okay, that's a lot of damage to have one global do, and we're getting 2 charges of that, and we also have Tip to Scale's Fire Breath, so that's 3, and we also have Dragon Rage, and we just do like a ton of damage in AoE anyway. So yeah, I definitely think Evoker threat is going to be even more of an issue with this tree, although the possibilities here are really cool, and I like the fire theme to it. Everything kind of works with your Fire Breath. You're detonating your Fire Breath, exploding it on your enemies, doing a ton of damage. One thing that's really cool about this tree to think about is imagine a boss like Tendril Sage Swift, right? So the boss uses its root ability. Everyone gets those roots. If you hit the Tip to Scale's Fire Breath into double Engulf, those roots are going to be dead, and you will do all of the damage. It's going to be really hard for someone to beat you to the punch with this AoE because this thing is just going to pump. I think overall, Devastation actually has some pretty solid trees. I just think that the class itself still has some issues. If you watch my videos, you know what those issues are, but I'm just going to talk about them again. So number 1, we need Spatial Paradox, which is AUG only, to be moved to a choice node on Time Spiral. It just makes sense. It would be a capstone choice on the bottom here. Allows us to have this really interesting option between Time Spiral versus Spatial Paradox that I think a lot of raids would really think hard about, so that'd be neat. I also think that it would be great to not have it be locked behind Augmentation only, because that's lame, and it causes us to have to play Augmentation for a single buff, which is just not fun, and I don't think it's really conducive to the current design of the game. So yeah, move Spatial Paradox to this node. Also, please give us some sort of baseline threat reduction, right? So many classes that have been cooking for longer than us have these threat reduction abilities built into them because Blizzard has realized that if your class doesn't have pets or guardians, threat is kind of an issue for you, right? Most other classes have some sort of threat reduction talent, or they have like some sort of fade ability or some sort of immunity or some way to mitigate pulling threat. We just don't have that. We just don't really have that many abilities right now because the class is very new. So I really think that Blizzard should rethink how Devastation threat works. I also think the tree could use a little work, especially with these left-hand nodes. One thing I guess I should mention is Firestorm is periodic damage, but it isn't a dot. So I don't think this is going to work with Engulf. So thankfully, we won't have to use this talent. But yeah, I think these talents are a little bit lame, and I don't think we really ever use them. these are just dead talents and should probably be reassessed. But yeah, the main concerns I have for Devastation are definitely just Spatial Paradox being a choice node, and also having some sort of threat ability to mitigate our insane threat we're going to have as we drop nukes on our enemies. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the new Flameshaper tree. I think this thing definitely has a lot of potential. I think Devastation has a lot of great options for its hero talents in the War Within. I just think that the class itself still has some really glaring issues, and it should probably be looked into. But would be really interested to hear your thoughts, so definitely share those in the comments below. And as always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more of my content, be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.